Dr. Sarah pierced the darkness of the excavation shaft as she descended deeper into the bowels of 442B. The drilling equipment had malfunctioned at precisely 312 meters below the surface, and what her team had discovered in that moment of mechanical failure would change the trajectory of human civilization forever. The metallic structures gleamed beneath of accumulated regolith, their surfaces covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure when viewed peripherally, as if they existed partially outside normal three-dimensional space. Her hands trembled as she approached the nearest panel. The metal was warm to the touch, despite the sub-zero temperature of the surrounding stone. It was impossible. Everything about this was impossible. The carbon dating equipment had shut down twice in the last hour. The readings it had briefly displayed before dying were so absurd that it initially believed them to be equipment errors. The structure predated human evolution by 50,000 years. Some of the metallurgical analyses suggested it was older still, perhaps much older. "Doctor, you need to see this," her lead engineer called through the communicator, his voice crackling with barely suppressed excitement. "The symbols, they're changing in response to seismic activity. I think they're reacting to the excavation." Rush to the chamber's center, where ancient control panels lined the walls in perfect geometric arrangement. Unlike anything in human technology, the surfaces were smooth and seamless, almost organic in their design. There were no visible buttons, no switches, no mechanical components she could identify. The technology was so far beyond human understanding that she couldn't even properly categorize what she was looking at. With scientific caution warring against her overwhelming curiosity, extended her arm and gently touched one of the panels. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The entire structure hummed to life with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Symbols blazed into existence across every surface, brilliant cyan lights cascading like digital rain in patterns that her mind struggled to process. The ancient facility, dormant for 50,000 years, was awakening. 10,000 kilometers away, in Earth's war room buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral James Reeves stared at tactical displays that showed him exactly what he didn't want to see. The Armada was positioned in perfect formation outside Earth's orbital space, their ships arranged in assault configurations that military strategists had been studying for months. 240 capital ships, dreadnoughts capable of sterilizing entire planets with a single coordinated strike. 30,000 fighter craft, each one more advanced than anything humanity could produce. The Empire's demands were simple, brutal, and absolute. Surrender all outer colonies within 72 hours or face complete annihilation. They offered no negotiation, no compromise, no possibility of peaceful resolution. Reeves had watched military analysts run the combat simulations 1,000 times. The results were always the same. Humanity could mount a desperate defense that might last for perhaps 90 days. During that time, their fleets would inflict some casualties on them, maybe enough to damage a few capital ships, destroy some fighters, cause the Empire some minor inconvenience. But ultimately, the math was inescapable. They had the industrial capacity, the technological advantage, and the sheer numerical superiority to reduce Earth to a lifeless cinder within 5 months. He closed his eyes and prayed for a miracle he didn't believe would come. Miracles were the stuff of old religions and children's stories. The universe operated on cold, mathematical principles, and those principles all pointed toward humanity's extinction. 50,000 years of slumbering technology was about to change everything. The signal from 442B traveled across the void at the speed of light, a simple electromagnetic pulse carrying a message encoded in frequencies that predated human civilization by. When it reached Earth, it triggered protocols so ancient and so deeply embedded in the planet's infrastructure that most of humanity had no idea they even existed. In bunkers beneath the trench, in caverns carved from bedrock beneath the Canadian Shield, in chambers hidden within the Antarctic ice sheet, systems that had lain dormant for 50,000 years began their resurrection sequence. Power reactors hummed to life, their fusion cores igniting with the fury of miniature suns. Gravitational stabilizers activated throughout Earth's crust, creating invisible matrices that prevented the planet from tearing itself apart under the strain of what was about to happen. Weapons systems that could reshape continents and vaporize orbital satellites powered up with a resonance that made the planet itself tremble like a living thing awakening from an impossibly long sleep. Seismic stations worldwide registered the phenomenon as a series of strange, perfectly rhythmic pulses emanating from deep within the Earth, something that no geological model could explain. On 442b, Doctor stood transfixed as the hologram materialized before her. The air itself seemed to ripple and bend around the figure, as if reality was struggling to accommodate something that didn't quite belong to normal three-dimensional space. The being was humanoid but distinctly alien, impossibly tall, standing nearly 3 meters even in its relaxed posture, with skin that shimmered like starlight filtered through water. Its eyes were the most unsettling feature, vast, incomprehensibly deep, containing what appeared to be entire universes swirling in miniature. When it moved, it left faint trails of distorted space in its wake. When the being spoke, Doctor understood every single word with perfect clarity, though she knew with absolute certainty that no translation matrix in existence could be that perfect, that seamless, that effortless. The words seemed to bypass her ears entirely and appear directly in her mind, formatted perfectly in English with all cultural and contextual nuances intact. "I am the custodian," the figure said, its voice resonating through dimensions that consciousness could barely perceive. "I have slept for epochs beyond your species' ability to comprehend. The star systems have wheeled through their orbits countless times. Civilizations have risen and fallen like tides. I have witnessed the birth and death of worlds. But now I have awakened. Why have I been summoned from my eternal rest?" Scientific mind warred violently with her instinct to run screaming from this impossible being. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember her training. This was a discovery. This was the greatest discovery in human history. She had to document it, understand it, communicate it clearly. I activated something," managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I touched one of the control panels. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't know I was activating anything. I'm sorry, You touched the activation protocol," the custodian interrupted, and something in its expression shifted, a configuration of its alien features that instinctively understood as acknowledgement, perhaps even satisfaction. "This means that a descendant of the architects walks upon this world. The seeding was successful. After 50,000 years of separation, the genetic line has survived. You are human, are you not? One of the architects' greatest experiments." "I don't understand," whispered. "The architects, what are you talking about? Who were they?" "All will be explained," the custodian assured her. "But first, we must address an immediate crisis. I detect a predatory force approaching a hostile civilization of considerable military power. The Empire. They are gathering in orbital space around your world, preparing for invasion. Their intention is conquest and subjugation." The custodian's expression shifted again, this time into something that could only interpret as grim determination. "The question I must ask you now is this. Do you wish for me to fulfill the Treaty of Ascension? Do you wish for me to defend your world from the threat that approaches the Pacific Ocean erupted without warning? Not with waves or volcanic fury, not with the catastrophic upheaval that would signal an underwater earthquake of impossible magnitude." Instead, something far more extraordinary occurred. Reality itself seemed to fracture and reform as a structure of incomprehensible scale began its ascent from the ocean floor. Water boiled away in expanding spheres of superheated steam. Tectonic plates groaned and shifted, creating tremors that registered on seismic equipment worldwide and sent tsunami warnings cascading across every coastal nation on Earth. The Sentinel rose like a god opening its eyes after an eternal sleep spanning epochs. It was massive beyond human comprehension, larger than Earth's moon, its dimensions so vast that observers initially mistook it for a celestial body rather than a constructed object. Its surface rippled with alien technology of such advanced design that human instruments couldn't properly analyze it. The structure was covered entirely in inscriptions that seemed to bend light around them, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. Not with physical pain, but with a profound wrongness, as if human eyes were attempting to process mathematical equations written in pure light and energy. Weapon systems extended from its hull like the limbs of some colossal predator, arrays that were themselves the size of mountains, each one capable of devastating entire star systems. When the Sentinel's primary power systems came fully online, the electromagnetic pulse was so powerful that it temporarily disrupted communications across half of Earth's surface and created auroras visible even in daylight hours at the equator. In the command center of the flagship Dominion's Pride, Admiral Orr watched his tactical display with mounting horror. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among his species. The Armada, which had conquered 17 star systems and crushed 100 civilizations across 10,000 years, was suddenly facing something that every law of warfare they understood. "What is that?" or demanded, his voice sharp with barely contained rage and fear. "Identify that object now." His tactical officer commander was frantically inputting queries into her station. "Sir, I don't know. Our sensors indicate it's artificial, but the energy readings they're impossible. The power output alone exceeds the combined output of our entire fleet by a factor of..." She paused, her antennae drooping as new data flooded her screens. "By a factor of 10,000 at minimum." 4 more structures erupted from Earth's crust simultaneously. One tore free from beneath the Antarctic ice sheet with such force that it fractured an area larger than the nation of France, sending shock waves that registered as magnitude 9.3 earthquakes worldwide. One pushed through the ocean floor in the Indian Ocean with casual, inexorable power, the water around it vaporizing instantly into superheated steam. One exploded from Siberian permafrost that had remained frozen for millions of years, the thermal bloom visible from orbit. One burst through Australian stone with devastating force, creating a crater visible from space. 5 colossal monuments to forgotten science and incomprehensible technology rose across Earth simultaneously, their emergence reshaping the very geography of the planet. And every single one of them turned their weapons outward toward the Armada hovering in orbital space above. Admiral Orr's command voice cracked as he screamed orders to his fleet. "Fire everything, all weapons systems, all ships, engage those objects immediately, maximum firepower, I want them destroyed." The Armada unleashed their full arsenal in a coordinated assault of stunning magnitude. Plasma volleys bright enough to damage unprotected optic sensors streaked outward. Kinetic strikes traveling at relativistic speeds carved through space. Nuclear warheads, thousands of them, ignited in perfectly coordinated detonations. Antimatter charges created cascading explosions that were visible from Earth's surface. 240 capital ships, refineries of death that had been perfected through countless wars and countless conquered worlds, focused every weapon they possessed on the 5 rising structures. The Sentinels absorbed the barrage without even slowing down. The weapons' fire dispersed against shields that seemed to render conventional warfare obsolete. And then the Sentinels fired back. The first volley from the Sentinels didn't manifest as anything humanity's weapons analysts could easily categorize. It wasn't a laser burst, not a conventional plasma weapon, not any form of kinetic strike that followed the normal laws of physics. Instead, it appeared to be a fundamental rewriting of reality itself in localized regions of space. A weapon that simply erased the existence of matter and energy, converting them into something that dissipated harmlessly into the void. 50 ships from the Armada simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not damaged, not even obliterated in the conventional sense. Erased, atomized at the molecular level. One moment they occupied 3-dimensional space, bristling with weapons and carrying crews of thousands. The next moment they existed only as expanding clouds of violently energized particles and radiation, spreading outward into the void like cosmic rain. Admiral Orr's tactical display flickered as it attempted to process what had just occurred. His processors worked frantically to update the fleet composition data, to recalculate their odds, to find some strategic response to a weapon that every military doctrine developed across 10,000 years of interstellar warfare. "Retreat," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation and rage. "Maximum FTL jumps, save what you can, all ships execute emergency jump coordinates, move now." But the Sentinels were faster than thought itself. Their weapons tracked targets with a precision that suggested they operated outside conventional space-time constraints. Another volley erupted from the 5 massive structures, and this time the destruction was even more catastrophic. 40 ships were eliminated, then 50 more. The mathematical precision of their annihilation was almost clinical. Each shot calculated to eliminate the maximum number of hostile vessels with minimal expenditure of energy. The attempted evasive maneuvers, but nothing in their arsenal or experience had prepared them for this. Their ships were fast, but the Sentinels' weapons were faster. Their shields were sophisticated, having been refined through countless battles, but they were utterly ineffective against weapons that rewrote the fundamental rules of physics. Their armor was thick, composed of exotic materials that could withstand asteroid impacts and stellar radiation, but it proved as fragile as paper against the Sentinels' devastating strikes. In the war room beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Foster watched the sensor feeds with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. His tactical officers were frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. The Armada, the greatest military force in the known galaxy, the civilization that had conquered and subjugated worlds without number, was being systematically dismantled by 5 structures that hadn't even moved from their positions. "Casualties?" Foster asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. His tactical officer took several seconds to respond, as if she were having difficulty believing the data her instruments were displaying. "Side, approximately 200 ships destroyed or beyond operational capacity, sir. That's 80% of their entire fleet. Human casualties, minimal. The Sentinels appear to be targeting only vessels. Our orbital platforms, our ships, our defensive stations. They're avoiding all of them. It's like they know the difference between friend and foe." Foster nodded slowly. Of course the Sentinels knew the difference. They had been dormant, waiting for this moment for 50,000 years. They had been designed by beings so advanced that the concept of artificial intelligence as humanity understood it was almost insulting to their sophistication. They weren't weapons. They were something far more. They were the will of an extinct civilization given form and purpose. The destruction continued for 90 more minutes. The fleet, once an instrument of absolute dominance, was reduced to broken fragments fleeing toward the safety of Imperial space. 30 surviving vessels jumped to FTL, carrying with them the survivors of what had once been the greatest military force in galactic history. The Sentinels did not pursue. They simply stood eternal and silent around Earth, their weapon systems powering down from maximum output to standby mode. The message they broadcast required no words. Protected world, Treaty of Ascension enforced, no hostile action permitted. The galaxy had a new power, and nobody, not the Empire, not the Merchant Confederacy, not the Free Worlds Coalition, not any civilization that had ever existed, could challenge it. Within hours of the Sentinels' devastating display of power, every government on Earth was in emergency session. The United Nations declared a global state of maximum alert. Emergency broadcasts interrupted every communication channel, every news network, every entertainment feed. Humanity collectively held its breath as the reality of what had transpired began to sink in. They had been saved. By something older than civilization itself, by weapons of unimaginable sophistication created by beings who had walked the galaxy when humanity's ancestors were still living in caves. They had been saved from extinction. Dr. Sarah was extracted from 442B by military transport and rushed to New Geneva under heavy security protocols. She arrived exhausted but exhilarated, her mind still reeling from the conversation she'd had with the custodian. World leaders and military strategists questioned her relentlessly for 18 consecutive hours, trying to extract every scrap of information she possessed about the Sentinels, about the custodian, about what the ancient treaty meant for humanity's future. "The architects," explained, her voice hoarse from constant communication and her scientific presentation of world-changing information, "were a civilization that reached what we might call technological singularity approximately 50,000 years ago. But instead of expanding through conquest and domination, as most spacefaring civilizations have done, they chose a different path. They chose to seed the galaxy with their own genetic descendants." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembled leaders. The implications were staggering. "Humans are one such seeding," she continued. "We are literally descended from the architect's genetics. They didn't want to control us or command us. They wanted us to grow naturally, to develop our own cultures, our own civilizations, our own unique perspectives and philosophies. But they also loved us enough to leave us guardians. The Sentinels are weapons of pure protection, not conquest. They activate only when a protected world faces extinction-level threats from hostile external forces." The Secretary General leaned forward, his expression grave. "You're saying we're— what exactly? Lab experiments? Cattle bred for some purpose we don't understand?" "We're their children," said firmly, and there was conviction in her voice that brooked no argument. "Literally descended from their genetics. They didn't want to control us. They wanted us to grow naturally, to develop our own cultures, our own civilizations. But they also loved us enough to leave us guardians. The Sentinels are weapons of pure protection, not conquest." The revelation sent shockwaves through galactic civilization that would take centuries to fully comprehend. The custodian, becoming more communicative as it began to understand human psychology and communication patterns, revealed that 17 worlds existed under the Treaty of Ascension. 17 protected worlds scattered across the spiral arm of the galaxy. 17 civilizations, all descended from the architects, all now suddenly aware of their true origins. And more stunning still, now that one sentinel array had awakened from its 50,000-year dormancy, the others were stirring too. On Theta IV, ancient structures erupted from beneath the surface with cataclysmic force, reshaping the planet's geography. On station, dormant facilities awakened for the first time since the architect's disappearance, their systems cycling online after an incomprehensible span of time. Across the galaxy, one by one, the other 16 sentinel arrays were activating. The Merchants' Confederacy, always pragmatic and driven by profit calculations, immediately began shifting trade routes toward the legacy worlds, as they were beginning to be called. The Free Worlds Coalition sent diplomatic envoys requesting formal alliance, their military strategists recognizing that proximity to protected worlds offered safety and stability. The Dominion, a civilization that had remained isolationist for open diplomatic channels that had been sealed for centuries. The entire balance of galactic power had shifted in a single catastrophic day. The Empire, humiliated and devastated by the loss of 80% of their military fleet, faced an impossible choice: accept this new reality or face complete annihilation. After 3 days of heated debate within their Imperial Council, the Emperor himself transmitted a message across all galactic frequencies. The Empire would retreat from human space. They would respect the Treaty of Ascension. They would not challenge the Sentinels again. But in the darker corners of the galaxy, where mercenaries gathered and outcasts plotted, whispers began to circulate. Whispers that the Sentinels were not invincible. Whispers that if someone was desperate enough, or foolish enough, or sufficiently well-armed, they might test that claim and perhaps prove the ancient weapons were merely bluffing. Those whispers would soon prove catastrophically wrong. 1 year after the Sentinels' dramatic activation, Earth had transformed into something unrecognizable from the world of 12 months prior. The spaceports that had seemed impossibly advanced just months earlier, gleaming monuments to human engineering and ambition, now appeared quaint and almost primitive compared to the interstellar infrastructure being constructed in orbit. New shipyards capable of producing vessels that would have seemed like science fiction just a year ago were coming online daily. Trade delegations from 200 distinct civilizations arrived in New Geneva, each one seeking to establish relations with the suddenly powerful human species. The custodian on 442B became the primary source of knowledge about the architects, gradually revealing fragments of understanding that revolutionized multiple scientific disciplines overnight. Transformation wasn't without complications. Earth's government struggled to adapt to sudden prominence on the galactic stage. Religious institutions grappled with the theological implications of being descended from an ancient alien civilization. Economists calculated the staggering wealth that would flow from trade with 200 other species. Military strategists began designing defense systems that would eventually allow humanity to protect itself when the Sentinels eventually powered down. Doctor found herself transformed from a simple archaeological researcher into the most important diplomat humanity had ever produced. She conducted negotiations with alien species whose biology easy categorization. She answered questions about human history, human culture, human philosophy from beings who viewed the entire spectrum of human civilization as a fascinating laboratory for studying how a young species developed. She became the living embodiment of humanity's bridge between its ancient past and its uncertain future. Admiral Reeves, standing on an observation platform in Earth orbit, watched a new ship complete its final construction stages. The Pioneer's Hope, the first genuine interstellar passenger liner ever built by human hands using technology derived from studying Sentinel systems. It was beautiful in a way that transcended aesthetics. Every curve, every surface, every component represented humanity's determination to claim its place among the stars not through conquest, but through innovation and cooperation. "Do you ever think about them?" asked Reeves during one of their increasingly rare quiet moments, both of them staring at the completed vessel. "The architects, I think about them constantly." "Every moment," admitted, her voice distant and reflective. "I wonder what they were like as individuals. Were they happy? Did they have families, hopes, dreams? Whether seeding the galaxy with their children was an act of love or an act of desperate hope that something of them would survive, even if they themselves didn't. Whether they watched us from somewhere, proud of what we might become, or whether they simply trusted that their genetic legacy would prove sufficient. Reeves nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the questions she posed. My grandfather used to tell me that the greatest gift a parent can give their child is not protection, but the strength to stand on their own. Not a shield, but the knowledge and ability to build their own shields. I think the architects understood that, said softly. The Sentinels aren't here to rule us. They're not here to dominate us or control our development. They're here to give us the space to grow, to protect us during our most vulnerable years, but with the explicit understanding that one day we would mature beyond needing them. The other 14 legacy worlds were developing in their own distinctive ways, each species utilizing the knowledge and technology available to them in ways that reflected their unique perspectives and values. The crystalline beings of Alpha had begun creating art that existed across quantum states, producing works of such profound beauty that humans who witnessed them wept without understanding why. The silicon-based collective intelligence of Theta had begun the largest engineering project ever attempted, a megastructure that would eventually span an entire solar system, a monument to what was possible when intellect was unbounded by biological limitations. Humanity, meanwhile, focused on what humans had always done best: exploration, innovation, and the fundamental, almost obsessive drive to understand their universe better. Explorers began charting routes to distant star systems. Scientists studied the fragments of architect knowledge, building upon of alien advancement. Artists created works inspired by contact with alien species. Musicians composed symphonies incorporating mathematical principles derived from Sentinel technology. The growth was exponential. Within a single year, humanity had advanced technologically as much as it had in the entire previous century. Within 5 years, human ships would rival those of civilizations that had possessed spacefaring capability for thousands of years. Within a decade, humanity would stand as equals among the legacy worlds, no longer children needing protection, but partners in building something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. 4 months after the Sentinel's activation, a message shattered the fragile peace that had begun to settle across the galaxy. The transmission came from the outer reaches of known space, from a region so lawless and dangerous that most civilizations refused to venture there. It was from the Void Collective, a loose, chaotic alliance of pirates, rogue military fleets, mercenary companies, and desperate civilizations that existed in the shadowy spaces between legitimate galactic powers. The message was defiant, almost reckless in its arrogance. We, the Void Collective, declare the Treaty of Ascension null and void. We do not recognize the authority of some ancient alien's right to dictate galactic politics. We do not accept that obsolete weapons systems should determine the future of galactic civilization. We announce our intention to prove the Sentinels are bluffing, and we have assembled a force sufficient to test that claim. The declaration sent shivers through diplomatic channels across the known galaxy. The Void Collective had hired themselves an impressive military force, 37 capital ships, some of them purchased from desperate military powers, others stolen through piracy, still others salvaged from ancient battlefields where wars had been fought thousands of years ago. The fleet wasn't as large as the Armada had been, but it was vicious, desperate, and absolutely willing to fight to the death if necessary. Their target, 442B, where the first Sentinel array stood. It was a calculated choice. Attack the site of the architect's most obvious installation, strike a symbolic blow against the very foundation of the legacy world's power. Doctor watched from the research station as the hostile fleet approached, 442B, with weapons hot and shields raised to maximum. The custodian's response came through every communication channel simultaneously, broadcast across the entire galaxy for all civilizations to witness. Hostile action detected, threat assessment extreme, elimination protocol initiated. The Sentinel on 442B didn't wheel around dramatically. It didn't adjust position or power up weapon systems in some theatrical display of force. It simply fired. One shot. One devastating application of physics rewriting technology that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality inward toward its target. 18 ships from the attacking fleet were obliterated instantaneously. They didn't explode. They didn't break apart. They simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across the void in expanding clouds of violently energized particles. The remaining 19 vessels attempted to retreat at maximum burn, their engines screaming with effort, their crews screaming with terror as they realized the magnitude of their miscalculation. But the Sentinels' weapons were faster than their engines could achieve, faster than light itself, faster than thought. 12 more ships were destroyed before they could reach jump distance. 18 more succumbed to secondary volleys. Only 7 vessels managed to escape, their hulls smoking, their crews traumatized beyond measure by what they had witnessed. The message the galaxy received was absolute, unambiguous, and permanent. The Sentinels would not negotiate. The Architect's children would not be challenged. Any civilization that dared test this principle would face complete erasure. The Void Collective dissolved within weeks. What had once been a loose alliance of desperate criminals and rogue powers simply fragmented as individual commanders recognized the futility of their cause. Mercenary companies disbanded rather than accept contracts against protected worlds. Even the most desperate, most foolish commanders in the known galaxy understood now. Challenging the Sentinels was not an act of war. It was an act of suicide. But something unexpected and profoundly important happened as word of the Void Collective's destruction spread through galactic civilization. Instead of fear paralyzing the smaller species and younger civilizations, hope bloomed. For the first time in galactic history, they finally had a chance. A genuine, legitimate chance to develop without conquest, without subjugation, without annihilation hanging over their heads like a perpetual death sentence. The Legacy Worlds Alliance was formally established 6 months after the Void Collective's failed assault, with Earth at its center. 17 worlds joined together not through conquest or military alliance, but through shared destiny and common heritage. And above them all, the Sentinels stood eternal watch, their weapons powered down but forever ready, their purpose fulfilled and eternal. 10 years after the Sentinels' dramatic awakening, Admiral James Reeves stood in the command center of Earth's new defensive array, watching holographic displays that showed the culmination of a decade of unprecedented cooperation and innovation. It wasn't a Sentinel. Nothing humanity could construct would ever truly match the incomprehensible sophistication of the Architect's technology. But it was impressive. It was beautiful. It was entirely, unmistakably human in its design and purpose. Dr. Sarah, now elderly but still sharp-minded and intellectually vibrant, stood beside him in the observation chamber. Her hair had turned completely silver, but her eyes still held the same wonder and curiosity that had driven her into archaeological work decades ago. Around Earth and scattered across the 14 other legacy worlds, massive defensive structures came online simultaneously. A coordinated activation that demonstrated the unprecedented level of cooperation between 17 distinct civilizations. Some of the structures were constructed from careful studies of stolen Sentinel designs, reverse-engineered by humanity's minds, working in cooperation with researchers from the crystalline beings of Alpha and the silicon-based intelligences of Theta. Others were entirely original creations, born from the unique perspectives and capabilities of each species. Together, they represented something the galaxy had never witnessed before, a united alliance of equals, all dedicated to protecting their shared future, all willing to sacrifice individual advantage for collective security. The custodian appeared one final time in holographic form across all 17 worlds simultaneously, its message transmitted to every inhabited planet, every space station, every vessel traveling through the void. Its words would be remembered for to come, quoted in philosophy classes and debated by historians. "The Treaty of Ascension is fulfilled," the hologram announced, its voice resonating across dimensions that human consciousness could barely perceive. "The Architect's children have matured. You have grown beyond the need for external protection. You have learned cooperation. You have learned sacrifice. You have learned that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from standing together. The Sentinels will now enter eternal dormancy. You are no longer protected children. You are protectors. You are the inheritors of the Architect's greatest legacy, not their weapons, but their hope." As the Sentinels powered down for the first time in 50,000 years, they didn't disappear into the void or disintegrate into forgotten memory. Instead, they transformed. The massive weapons systems powered down. The defensive arrays went silent. But the structures themselves remained, monuments carved from the bedrock of protected worlds, reminders of where humanity had come from and what it had achieved. Orbital stations were constructed around them, serving as museums where future generations could study the architect's technology. Universities were established in their shadows, where students from 17 different species learned together. Pilgrimage sites were created where individuals could contemplate their connection to a civilization that had walked the galaxy 50,000 years before their own species even achieved consciousness. Turned to Reeves as they watched the final Sentinel power down, its massive form settling into dormancy with a gentle hum that seemed to resonate with finality and purpose. "Do you think they'd be proud?" she asked softly. "The architects, if they could see what we've become." Reeves smiled and extended his hand toward the viewport where Earth rotated below them, alive and vibrant with the activity of a species that had suddenly claimed its place among the stars. Around them, the galaxy glittered with the light of 17 worlds, no longer protected by ancient weapons, but by something far more powerful, united purpose and shared destiny. "I think they'd be more than proud," Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think they'd understand that they succeeded, not just in keeping us alive, but in teaching us to live, really live, as equals among equals, as partners in building something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone." The new age had begun in earnest. Humanity had no need for forgotten war machines anymore. The Sentinels had served their purpose, awakening from dormancy to save the architect's children from extinction, then stepping back to allow those children to build their own future. The Empire's Armada had vanished without a trace, scattered into cosmic dust by weapons that transcended conventional understanding. From the ashes of that conflict, 17 worlds had risen to claim their rightful place among the stars, not as children needing protection, but as adults ready to shape the future. Not as victims, but as inheritors. Not as subjects of some ancient power, but as partners in a shared vision of what civilization